graduate and teaching-focused professors at the Faculty of Engineering. And I'm especially delighted this evening to be introducing my fabulous colleague, Professor Emanuela Tilley. My name is John Mitchell. I'm the co-director of the Centre for Engineering Education here at UCL. Amongst the mission of the Centre, we host this event and we look to raise the profile of those staff within the institution who are focused on education. And it's with great pride that I reflect that engineering now has a third of those professors teaching that have been promoted to this grade within the institution. And I think that is something that UCL should be proud of, and we know that it's something that other institutions look on with some envy, that our academic career framework and the way we've been able to champion the careers of those that focus on teaching is something that has really taken great success. So it's fabulous you could all join with us tonight to celebrate the extraordinary achievements of one of the Centre's own. So it's a little unusual for me to be here representing the CE. Usually that privilege falls to Emanuela herself, who's been the driving force in developing this series for the Centre. And it's just one of the many initiatives to support staff in their teaching endeavours that I'm sure we'll hear more about during her talk tonight. And while we expect a lot of her, I think it's only fair that she shouldn't be both host and speaker tonight. So I graciously stepped in to fill the shoes and give the welcome. And of course, it gives me an opportunity to say a few words about Emanuela, something that I'm no doubt should be very pleased about. So to set a little context, as you'll have read in the invite, Emanuela joined UCL in 2013. And at that time, we were in the midst of a major curriculum revision. At the time, I'd been intent on bringing staff from each of the departments to the faculty team to try and lead the innovation. But I was persuaded that the then fledgling integrated engineering programme needed some different types of staff, some different people bringing different experience to lead this change. But at the time, the teaching fellow route that I spoke so proudly of a moment ago was still very poorly formed. And while it did have some wonderful and dedicated members of staff, it had really been invented as a way to unallocate non-research active staff to keep them away from the TEF. And that was a stigma it was still struggling to escape from at the time. But there was growing momentum across UCL to professionalise this route. And it was something that engineering really wanted to do. And we were very proud that we've been able to do that. We realised that we needed to recruit staff from outside the straitjacket that the REF placed upon departments, to bring in expertise and an innate understanding of the importance of skills, of problem-based learning, and embedding an understanding of the innate value of engineering that has become the trademark of the IEP, that I'm sure you'll hear a lot about more tonight. So in 2013, we recruited 3 new members of teaching staff to the teaching track, initially for only 2 years, the funding we had at the time. Although I'm pleased to say 10 years on, all 3 of them are still members of staff here, and 2 have been promoted to the grade of professor. One of those was Emanuela, who joined the team to lead the projects thread that has become the backbone of the new curriculum. She brought with her industrial experience from the consulting engineering sector, a passionate enthusiasm for engineering education, and was still blissfully ignorant of the stifling bureaucracy that universities like UCL impart on any sort of curriculum development project. These were essential qualities for development within the team. Since those days, she's risen rapidly through the ranks of the faculty, becoming Director of the Integrated Engineering Programme in 2016 and being promoted to Professor, which we celebrate tonight in 2019. She's now the Director of Studies within the Centre as it's expanded to cover more modules and more programmes across the faculty. But she's also highly regarded in the engineering education community, recently becoming Vice President of the European Society for Engineering Education and being a regular keynote speaker at international conferences and a consultant and advisor for curriculum development projects worldwide. I very much like to think that she's exactly the sort of academic that was in mind when the academic teaching fellow and the professional teaching fellow position was created. One utterly focused on the student journey, the student experience, and particularly the quality and relevance of an engineering education to produce graduates that are ready for their careers. But also someone that is generous in her support of staff and colleagues that are looking to do the same, whether they're at UCL, whether they're in the UK, or in other parts of the world. We've worked together now for just over 10 years, a time I've thoroughly enjoyed, and I'd like to think we share a vision of what engineering education can and should be. Although I also think it's fair to say we don't always share a vision of exactly how that should be achieved. It's been such a pleasure to work with her on many of the projects and initiatives we shared and shaped together. And she's been an accomplice to some of my crazier ideas, although more than once I've been subjected to the raised eyebrow and the refrain of "really?" that has come with some of those particular ideas. So once again, I'm delighted that you can all join with us tonight as we celebrate and enjoy all that Emanuela has achieved in her career so far, and that I have no doubt that she will continue to achieve in her career in the future. So please welcome to the stage Professor Emanuela Tilley.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for coming. Thank you, John, for that wonderful intro. I think some of my slides, well, we can slide through really quickly because you've given so much in that intro, which is wonderful. I just want to start by asking anyone, please put your hand up if you've ever been to an inaugural lecture before. Okay, so then put your hands down. If you haven't been to an inaugural lecture, please put your hand up. Great, okay, so I have only ever been to 4, and this is my first, so that's good. I went to 2 before COVID, and I went to 2 after COVID. 2 recently because of the series that John has mentioned, particularly dedicated to those that are professors with a focus in education. So let me give you a bit of a thought about how I think this is going to go. And this is really common in inaugural lectures. Let's discuss what this is going to be like. So, this is my talk. My theme is changing hearts, minds, systems, and culture for the future of engineering education. And I believe that throughout my presentation, you will be seeing quite a lot of that. I won't be spelling it out, but hopefully it'll come across. However, this really is all about me. So I get to take I don't do this very often, and it's not easy to do. So I'm the professor, and you sit there, and I get to present. I get to profess, I get to impart, and I get to entertain you as well, because I think there's a little bit of that when it comes to lecturing. But there is also a little bit of a structure that I'd like to take from all of those inaugurals that I've seen before. There's a little bit of a thanks, there's a talk, and then there's some drinks. So those are 3 parts that are all equally important. I'm going to start mine with a little bit of thanks. Sometimes this happens at the end, but I really feel like this needs to happen now because I can see all your faces, and I feel like you are all here for a reason. So let's start. I can't name all the names because there's plenty of people here that are on the list, but also those that aren't. So if I call out or if I say something that you recognize, then please put your hand up, all right? So, senior leadership. Anyone that's in a senior leadership role, whether that's at the institution, thank you very much for coming, or senior leadership of the Centre for Engineering Education, or senior leadership of ARENA, hello. We know that the Dean was unable to come today, so he sends his apologies. Thank you all for your efforts in trying to create the institution that is UCL and supporting us in the education work that we're doing. I completely thank you for that work and love working alongside you. To John, for your leadership right now representing the Centre. We have our Vice Dean Education. Thank you so much for coming. I completely appreciate you and your roles in certainly my career so far. And then I think the majority of this group is probably academic colleagues. So if you are an academic colleague, please put your hand up. Great, hello. And so if you're a teaching-focused academic colleague, please put your hand up. We are such a lovely community, and it is wonderful to have you here. I love leading amongst you at times, and I love being with you all the time. So thank you for being here, and thank you so much for working alongside me. Certainly anyone in research as well, so that was across the whole academics colleagues. Professional services and technical staff. Anyone in that role that, yes, hello. Thank you so much for coming. As you'll see in my presentation, and I hope you feel it, you are such a big part of everything that we've done. And without professional services as great as you, all of you, we wouldn't be able to achieve what we've done at such a scale. So it's really important to me. I don't think I have any students in PGTAs in the room, but if that's the case, definitely put your hands up. I don't teach very much to large cohorts. That was way back 10 years ago that I do. My cohorts are very small and actually rarely engineering students, so that's okay. External partners and collaborators. Anyone that's come from outside UCL. Hello. I've enjoyed working with you all. These are so important to us, to me, but also to the centre. What we're doing at UCL here is incredibly important, and I know we have to do more work to kind of branch out of engineering. But the partnerships, who we surround ourselves outside of UCL is what keeps us going, right? For all the strifes and all the difficulties we have within our own institution, it's the partnerships that keep us going. That verve to say what you're doing is important and I really want to work with you is such an important thing. Often we go to these outside of our institutions to find like-minded people, and I find that in our collaborations I have found that. The other is, I should say, just for all the partners, those particularly in Canada that were part of my early research and when I was a student, there are some key people within that academic environment that I'd like to thank at this time too, and I'm thinking of them. The last is perhaps my family and friends, so the rest of the gang, if you want to put your hands up. I've got my parents here from Canada, which I'm incredibly delightful for them to be joining me. My little daughter over here and my other one over there, they'll be walking around a little bit. I should say I've got a new niece who I have to be thankful to, because she was 2 weeks late. And because of her, my parents are here. So, yep, they've stayed a little bit longer because she was incredibly overdue. So I hope I've reached out to all of you. You have all contributed to me and to my story. And I would just want to say thank you. And I wanted to do it first because that's just how important it is to me. So, you would be forgiven to think that this talk is going to be about the IEP. So I want to put up here for you all of the pictures that we have used over and over and over again to different audiences to kind of describe what the IEP is. And so I'm going to put that there. And then what I'm going to do, and this is really odd, but bear with me, I'm going to actually show one of the only videos that I like of myself discussing the IEP. While I was doing this, it's such an odd thing, but you know, I see my face everywhere, and that is not a comfortable thing. But I really do like this video, and it serves a purpose. Interdisciplinary teaching framework with focus on understanding teamworking. We do a lot of project work, and this all happens alongside our students' core learning in their degree program.
So we started with a premise that engineering isn't just about building stuff or the sorts of definitions you usually get. And we talk about engineering being the art and practice of changing the physical world for the use and benefit of all. You know, a lot of the first few years were very theory-based. We wanted our students to have more opportunity to put those fundamentals into practice. We wanted them doing projects, we wanted them engaging in things that were real and that were going to both enhance their technical knowledge but also their skills, and get them doing that right from the very beginning of the degree. Understanding what engineering is, how it has a role in society, and how it could help them to change the world, do things that would actually really impact on society.
our faculty is made up of 8 departments, and of all of our students experience the IEP in some way. In the first year, that's where the major changes are, because we want to implement that PBL style learning, the skills-based learning, and then the applied maths. This is all while the students are starting to understand what their chosen degree program is all about. So the challenges course is our first PBL experience for the students, and then the scenarios that follow after this are rather different in format. They're the 1-week intensives. Students love it, hate it as well, right? Because they're discipline specific, but they're intense because they don't go to any other classes. They are put in a project with a team that they often haven't worked with before, and they work on a very technical, intensive project. And then our last one is How to Change the World, which again, that's the 9th project. That's the one just before they go in the 3rd year, and it extends their knowledge and their comfort zone, really, because it's a socially driven problem. It is, how do you impact the people that have or are affected by these really wicked challenges like poverty, like water pollution, like materials and how to recycle them, and waste that is part of how we live. Those projects are really connected to the UN sustainability goals. So we are asking them to contribute in a very different way.
What are the students doing that's different now in the new programs from the programs they had before?
Well, I think the most significant change is the amount of project work that the students do. I mean, it's really unique that in the first 2 years, all of our students do at least 9 projects, which are different lengths. They have very different assessments, very different student experiences. But we call this the spine of project work. And really what it allows our students to do is put in the practice that learning of not just their core technical knowledge, but also the skills that we want them to practice. Both those professional skills, so things like communication, obviously team working, because that's the environment in which engineers work, but also their leadership skills, critical thinking, analysis. The Math Lab gets embedded into the projects because that's how we teach math now, right from the beginning. It is putting that programming language in their hands as a tool. And of course, the discipline or the robustness of their chosen degree program is still there, and it is in partnership all through this spine of projects, and actually the learning of what engineering design is.
So how do students react to this different sort of teaching?
Actually, I think our students are rather conservative because they expect to come into university and be taught by a professor at the bottom of the lecture theatre. This active learning environment that we put them into from the first day, it is rather uncomfortable. But I think at first, very daunting, perhaps a little bit scary of this new learning environment. But I think relationships grow, their confidence builds, and even the ability to practice and put to use their technical knowledge is really what shines at the end of the day. I think the other thing too is that the IEP is now the systematic change. So it's across the curriculum, and we put in opportunities for that non-traditional teaching. So the PBL alongside skills-based learning, getting our students to cross those silos of discipline-specific learning. There are pieces from this in the way we've structured it that can really actually be used in other institutions. Thanks for listening to that. I think with all my nerves, I don't think I could have said it any better. And it gives you a sense of what the IEP is. What I am going to then lead you to, there's a few reasons why I like that video. One of the reasons is because of the way in which John and I interact. John and I have been naturally interacting in that way over the years, and it's been a pleasure to work with him. What I should say is also that if you want to know more about how the IEP actually came about and what the hurdles were to make it happen, please go back to his inaugural lecture on YouTube, because he will explain to you what it took just to get it off the ground. And that's his story. My story kind of goes on from that. And I say this because I know it makes him blush. Tells me that all the time. But what he just said is that he was persuaded to find people outside of the departments to take on key roles to enable the change. I actually think that's his genius. that he took, he was actually able to create 3 roles to make such a difference, and that we are all still contributing in such a fantastic way and have grown through this. So the 3 academic that they are the people that he brought into these academic roles to focus on teaching were to help with that theory and practice and bringing the technical and the practice together, and that was my job. And then I've also have my colleague here, Dr. Abel Naimafine, who was already in academia but came together to lead the mathematics and bringing that across the faculty. And then another colleague of mine who is not an engineer. She's a scientist and someone that works in technical communication, and without her brilliance, really couldn't help us get this professional skills off the ground. So why me? Maybe John persuaded you in his opening talk, but I want to tell you that maybe it's because in my interview I told him that I did project-based learning. You know, I'm from Canada, my institution, we did projects all the time. It was natural to us. And it's interesting, the project that I remember, the 2 projects I remember my most, and I know my mom and dad do as well, and even my friends that did it with me, you know, making utensils for those that have arthritis, working with people to kind of use our utensils, and then also working with the Canadian rowing team to make new oar blades for them so that they can go and increase their times. So that made an impact on me, no doubt. Or maybe it's because I was, at that time, working in an interdisciplinary space, and he wanted to introduce more interdisciplinarity and in a very real and authentic way. So my background, I'm a mechanical engineer in my undergraduate, and then I went on to do my master's in civil engineering, in the aerodynamics of civil structures. So it was that testing, very familiar with wind tunnel testing, very familiar with working with authentic sensors and that sort of thing, but also being quite creative in the way in which I can communicate my work and that sort of thing. So that's a little show of what I did, showing the vortex shedding across bridge decks of different shapes. That's the bridge that I did in my research, and the vortex shedding that comes across from it in the experimental labs that I did. So maybe it was my interdisciplinarity, I'm not sure. Maybe it was because at Western, where I was, there was already an integrated engineering program. I remember writing the application and making sure the words integrated engineering were all over the application. So whatever filter would be used, there would be integrated engineering. I just thought, oh, my goodness, are they actually doing something I know about? And maybe it's because of my industrial experience. I moved to the UK after doing my research and my schooling in Canada. I stopped my research and I came to the UK to build a company and a new wind tunnel facility to test the aerodynamics of structures that are phenomenal. You see Leadenhall there, and the, was it 100 different configurations we did on the basement or the ground floor of that so that it wasn't so windy. I look at my husband because he worked with me there too. Or the phenomenal, you know, Sheikh Zayed Museum over there, those are actually wings. In Abu Dhabi, there's a Sheikh Zayed Museum in honor of the first Sheikh, and they are wings of a bird. And then Masdar City, the city that is meant to be net zero, and they were making it out in the middle of the desert. Those are the types of projects that I worked on, that I was hoping maybe that's the reason why I was hired. But I was hired to design curriculum, and gosh, this was so much fun. I enjoyed it so much. I am the type of person that loves to work with a blank sheet of paper. I am not discouraged in any way about not having a path already drawn for me, and I know that my colleagues perhaps realize that. But for me, so that you understand the language, I really like these 2 definitions of what curriculum is. So curriculum is a plan for learning, really. And more specifically, an organized set of learning experiences, much like what we've done in the IEP, aim to modify the behavior of the learners. We are trying to create a different, have an impact on the learner, and so that in a desired and predetermined way. But curriculum for me also involves social practices, multi-layered social practices. including infrastructure and pedagogy. So pedagogy, that word is about how we deliver it. Am I here imparting my knowledge, or am I going to ask you to get into groups and talk about what you think about the topic and create your own knowledge? Pedagogy is how we deliver our teaching and what that means about the lecturer and the student. But it also means our assessments. So how am I going to grade my students? What type of work am I going to get them to do? And through that, the education, it's structured, it's enacted, and in many times, you try to figure out whether or not your curriculum is working for those goals that you've set out for. So my task when I was hired by John was to design and deliver a new Year 1 module, something that's never happened before here at the UCL, and certainly, I know, doesn't happen very often in engineering. So my requirements were the class or the module needed to be project-based. So it wasn't going to be like this, me lecturing, academics lecturing. Students were going to be doing things. They were going to be working on real projects from the beginning. They were going to be using their technical knowledge to practice their skills and also develop their knowledge in the meantime. And it was meant to be steeped in societal context. So the project's not a toy project. These are real projects about sustainability, health, things that really are impacting our world these days. It was meant to be for students from across the faculty. And that means multidisciplinary, 7 engineering departments, large scale, 700 students or plus. Never really been done before. Students are to work in teams. Again, something that still doesn't happen across UCL. It happens very much in engineering, and we know not just at UCL, but other parts of UCL engineering as well. But that means that you have to create assessments that are both individual for the student to kind of show their learning, but also the team. And those are 2 very different beasts. Students must demonstrate their professional skills. So in their taking on of the project, we want them to demonstrate the skills. We want to demonstrate them, and we will also be assessing them on that. And they do that in parallel with the module that was Design and Professional Skills, where they would actually go and learn what the skill is all about. So I was also someone from industry, very fresh to academia. I had to lead and manage a team of academics, many of them that were already at grade 10. You know? So, and this was from across departments, training them as I went, with the ideas that I had in my mind, with some really important postgraduate teaching assistants, the PhD students that gave their all to really support us, excuse me. So the engineering challenges was the module. It actually used to be called integrated engineering, and in our really early mistake, one of our mistakes was don't call the module the same thing as your program, because it's very confusing. So how do you approach creating, such a module? Well, we needed some context, and we looked to the UCL Grand Challenges, global health, and sustainable cities or sustainable energy. For me, coming from an engineering background, someone that worked on projects and worked in design, particularly because I was working with architects so closely in the built environment, I needed to understand what design meant to the faculty and what it meant to all the disciplines that I was meant to be representing. So this was my biggest effort, actually, meeting people across all the departments that had any idea or any alignment with design, what that meant, and what type of process they would actually align with. So these are some of the ones that I really kind of took on board, whether that's the V model from software and computer science, the Royal College of Arts, do the Golden Arch of Design, the Double Diamond model from the Design Council, or even from our very own civil engineering. They were core to my understanding of how we could teach design and what we could do with it. What I then took was the language from all of these models and created something for the faculty, which really needed to resonate to the staff and the students. And the language within this kind of aligns with all of that, so they could use it as a way, particularly, to guide the students through the projects. It was a way of getting the students to go from the problem, someone's problem who has the need, all the way to actually manifesting a solution or even just a concept. But what was really important for us was, and this comes from our research around the skills that engineers need, for us this is a decision-based cycle. It's not a creativity-based cycle, it's not an ideation-based cycle. This cycle is about enabling the students to make decisions when they need to move forward. Because in the engineering world, what I realized from my practice was that engineers often don't have the information we need to make those decisions. We're very good, and we have to develop those skills to estimate and assume and move forward. And so we put that front and center, making sure that that was a key thing in their learning. And so with everything in my head, I sought out the academics that were assigned to this module, each from all the departments, and we went forward and tried to create those project briefs. We had lesson plans. Creating, and my IEP team know, we create central, lesson plans and PowerPoint slides because we can't teach 700 students in one go. So we have this team, and they all have the same resources. But the difference between our projects and what's happening in our classroom is that we wanted to make it kind of shine to the staff. So the projects were different often in the different classrooms. And we also had to adapt to that. One of the things we made sure in the beginning is to make sure there was a societal context. So for me, aligning my small project within this larger module with the community was really important. There was always that aspect. And then you put in the place that is the syllabus or the content, and then you've got to get the students to do it. Getting students to work in teams was a challenge. It still is a challenge. We in engineering know that in third year, fourth year, that's where the team working really comes in. We challenged everybody to bring it in the first year. And I will remember with the faces of when we first said this. You can't do that. They couldn't possibly do that. That is just not possible. We have to tell them what to do. You couldn't ask them of that. Of course we can. We just need to scaffold and do things properly. So when we implemented teamwork, what we realized is that we also have to create other systems to support them in that. And that is not traditional teaching, is it? Those systems are really important. So we brought in Clifton Strengths, which is a tool that we still give to the students. And it allows the students to kind of recognize what their strengths are so they can work to their best ability. And kind of almost stop that notion that you have to work on your weaknesses to balance out the way in which you work, but work towards your strengths and partner with those that perhaps you may think you have a gap in your skills based. That's what engineering is about, finding the best in the teams that you have. So that individuality is something that we wanted to bring out and give the language to the students. Of course, we teach teamworking now. We don't just drop them in it and say, boom, you're going to do some teamworking. We tell them that there is an actual cycle when it comes to teamworking. You can't see that, but forming, storming, norming, performing. It means that things are going to go well and then they're going to go really bad before you actually create something that you're going to be proud of, right? And maybe you won't even get there, but there is a cycle when it comes to collaboration over time. We also embedded peer assessment. This was also something that wasn't really that common. And one of the reasons why we put it in is so that students could be accountable to each other. That's really important. In teamwork, assessing someone's contribution to the teamwork was something that we wanted a language to happen between the students. That they weren't just accountable for their grades, but they were accountable to each other. That's what happens in engineering. There are different ways to do this, but it was certainly something that we were very clear on in the IEP, that when we were going to do project work, peer assessment was going to be there. And then lastly, the staff. Changing their role from that person, or as they call it, the sage on the stage, to someone that's the guide on the side, as you would say. That is a fundamental shift in the way in which we teach. I didn't realize it back then, but now that we are actually helping others to implement active learning in this way, where students are doing quite a lot more of their learning, that constructivist approach, that they are able to kind of characterize their learning and understand their learning, develop their learning, with the facilitator that is the academic on the side. Someone in another country, in Egypt, when we're working with them, she said to me, my staff are there's some challenges here in doing that type of learning, or a type of teaching, apologies. And she said, you are playing with their identity. As someone that has been teaching and lecturing for ages, but also has been taught this way, that's who they are. That's the way in which they do their job, and so many of us relate to that in their identity. And I feel as though that's something that I didn't quite appreciate back then, but I certainly do now. We know so much more about that. So certainly something that we worked really hard on and continue to. And there are plenty of staff that tell us now how they had never done problem-based learning and now are leading the charge, really helping us to train the next group. We did really fun stuff too, and one of the things that I marvel at all the time are some of the traditions that come through the efforts that we've done, and one of them is Pebble in the Pond, and this was all about having a bit of fun, doing a bit of teamwork and design, and a bit of an icebreaker, getting these students to work together to kind of get a pebble at the end of 10 tables, 10 teams together with a mechanism built out of cardboard and all of that, and get it to be thrown in the pond without physically touching it, so using their physics knowledge and stuff. That is a really great way of just introducing students to their cohort, to the expectation of their learning in a really fun way. I will remember the people I dragged, some of them might be in this room, we went to the Institute of Making and tried to actually see if we could make these things. So we piloted quite a lot of it, and that was really fun too. But this has been going 10 years strong, and I hope it never really goes, because it's such a great way to kind of introduce them to a different way of learning. I want to go into some of the things that I was so privileged to do, and I think about it now because it's made such an impact on me, and if I could just impart some of the key things we learned through our research, because we felt that was such a big part of what we've done, to not just do it in the classroom, but to understand what actually has been happening. So ipsative learning is something that I was introduced to from a colleague of mine at the IOE, or the Institute of Education. And this is the study that we worked on, and my colleague and I did a book chapter, and to do a book chapter is just mind-blowing. So this is one of my first real memories that is just so significant. But in the challenges, one of the things that I implemented was to make sure that we did some really authentic things like we did in industry, where you have design review meetings. At different parts of the project, you sit down with your project director, and the team kind of says, progress. What have you been doing? Are you hitting your milestones? And that sort of thing. So I was going to treat the students that way. We were going to have 2 discrete review meetings. And the way it was going to be aligned to their assessment was that we were going to go through the criteria on which they were going to ultimately submit their final project, right? So in the first one, it's the first half of the project, and the second one is the second half. So this ipsative was all about trying to understand if we could help the students and give feedback and assessment based on their progress, not on what they were establishing and the grade of what they've handed in. So these draft meetings, or formative, as we would say, we would have a feed forward. We would certainly look towards the next step. But the really important thing is that we would feed back, and we would tell them how they've done and how they've progressed before ultimately their final assessment, which came out of those 2 meetings. Their portfolio of work, looking through the rubrics, understanding how they move forward. That's ipsative, and that was something that had never really been explored in engineering, and I was really, really grateful to my colleague in the IOE to introduce it. So our outcome, the outcome of this was that through that there was a lot of reflection. Not just written reflection, but verbal reflection. And we always say, and we always talk about this, how reflection feels like an add-on. How do you embed it into the student's actual work? Well, for us, those student reflections supported our ideas or theses that they would certainly increase their understanding of the project aims and the criteria. We know as educators too, students don't look at the rubrics, do they sometimes? They don't really know what they're being assessed on. So putting it in front of them and asking them to say, how do you think you did on this? And they would grade themselves, and we would grade them, and we would talk about the differences as well in those meetings. The other thing that we realized, actually, that it also empowered them to make decisions to go forward. When we were talking about their progress, it was that validation they needed in quite a chaotic, active learning that allowed them to keep moving forward. And so that ipsative approach, understanding their progress and validating it, is really important. The other research study, and you'll see a theme here down at the bottom. Oh no! The little screen doesn't work in the corner. And we can't see who it is. Oh gosh, okay. Kate Roach. You'll see her name a lot. And Gwyneth Hughes from IOE. So the next research study that has really stuck with us is about trying to understand authentic learning. We talk a lot about this, authentic learning. What is it? Trying to bring the real world in, real world projects, get them to do real things. What does that mean? If we go into the literature, what we wanted to understand, and the literature is more in the, I suppose, in the educational-based literature, but we wanted to know really what they were, what the students perceived through their authentic learning experiences in projects to support and maximize their learning. So the data shows that our students perceived in the challenges module that the experiences were authentic. They believed that. They told us that. That was great. But it wasn't because of the context. It wasn't because of the context of the project, that it was based in Peru or these real people were having that project or that problem. And it wasn't because of the outputs. It wasn't because of the project and the solution that they put out there that thought this was really significant. It was really actually something that's described as cognitive realism. And I write it here. It's the activity that consists within the project tasks that takes students through the thinking, that real-world thinking of the engineer. That's really what they described as being authentic. I really think Margot's doing a great job of trying to steal my attention, but I will win. Steal your attention. So that was really important. And that's important for all of us when we do project-based learning, that actually that thinking process is just as important as the outputs and the context and the tasks that we put them through. So that was the buy-in. So through our work, through the IEP, the challenges sit here. You've seen this in a nice fancy in the video, but the challenge is the first project of the 9. And so we've got the challenges, and then we've got these 1-week scenarios, which are in the beyond that, so first year and second year. And what we've done there is that we built a community of practice. Because we were all learning together, many of the people in the departments were creating projects that were associated with the scenarios or these 1-week technical projects, and they had never done it before. So we walked each other through it. And we had lots of meetings about what the assessment's going to be like. How do we bring the context in? How do we make sure that skills are front and center? And that community of practice really held us together for the first, I would say, 4 or 5 years. And particularly in the development. And so then what comes next is a project, research funded. First time we were funded for the research, which was really great. So what is being learned in project-based learning? We now have the audience of the academics. They are really trying to kind of bring the project-based learning in. What is it that they're actually learning? Higher education, and these are the sorts of things that we built our discussion on, or our thesis on, I guess. That we know higher education leads to employment. So we know, and there's lots of rhetoric to say, that project and project-based learning gets them ready for work, makes them employable, we can do competencies and capabilities and touch on all of that. Engineering employers, the Royal Academy of Engineering, at that time particularly were saying that the skills were just as important. Problem-based and problem-solving skills were really important. And working and projects are helping them in their actual, the nature of the learning that is aligned to their eventual work. So the engineering working leading to practice. So our study was all about observing the students, which this is significant for me because this was the first time that I had ever done research on observation. I, like many other engineers, want data, core data, right? Surveys and real hard data, quantitative data. This was the first time for me where I stepped into the real messiness of what is qualitative data, but it's such an eye-opener. So the observations and then doing interviews in situ with students was really the basis of the study. And we wanted to kind of touch on all of these things that we know are part of project-based learning. I should say that Anne Laheath and Janet Broad and Andrea Detmer and Kate Roach were part of that study. So what do they learn in PJBL or project-based learning? For us, creating their own knowledge, that technical and non-technical aspects of the discipline they're in is really important, and then that comes out. The practical and the social development of the non-technical aspects of engineering solutions is really important too. So we touched on students realizing the wider context of their projects, which was really important. Not just in a social way, but in a very practical way, which was great. So they also use their knowledge to create real solutions, so we expected them to do that, and they do that within their own disciplinary context, which was important. And they operationalize, and this was interesting, their investigative processes. So how do they go do their research? How do they do their experimentation? How do they work together to do that? That is very much based on the discipline, which is really interesting. And then developing that collaborative practice was certainly something we always knew was there. So those are key aspects. It's fun, and that's really important too. But this depends on, and I think this is where it's really kind of striking, is that it depends on the complexity and the type of the project, the degree of autonomy that is expected, and the scaffolding that you provide. So it's that balance. The other thing that we needed to really kind of acknowledge was the interaction with the technological objects, or the object-based learning that was going on. The ubiquitous presence of and the interaction with the equipment that they're using is very specific to their learning and frames their learning process. So when we're building these projects, we have to be mindful of the environment as well as the technology that they use, because it informs and frames their learning process. The cross-curricular expectations, induction, everything, the way in which you set out a project is really important. Those key messages have to be there from the beginning about what the learning is and what the intent is. And then that active mediation, really kind of creating that facilitative role through feedback, questioning, reflection, and making the most of the range of people that should be in the room, like their peers, the PGTAs or the teaching assistants that are often easier for them to interact with, the lecturers, and then obviously external experts. But what this requires is a shift in an understanding of learning. Learning is a social practice, and that is something that we need to embrace and really take on board. Student projects feature, and this is through, student project groups to feature distributed cognition. And what that means is, and we know this, is that not every student in the team knows every bit of the project. And we know that that distributed cognition is really actually very important and natural. So we have to be cognizant of it, but also nurturing of it. We need to have lots of series of interactions, so the students need to come together. We need to force that. Not just simply apply their learning. One of the things that I often hate people saying is that PBL is about applying their knowledge. Fundamentally, I believe that that is limiting their possibilities. Because we know PJBL or problem-based learning, we know that they create new knowledge within it. And so we shouldn't be putting that barrier on them. And then lastly, recognizing that the knowledge becomes a lens. That knowledge that they create, that we co-create with them as facilitators, becomes a lens through which their problems, situations, practices specific to their discipline, electrical engineering, chemical engineering, and how they're being used and scrutinized by the students. That's really, really important. And then the last part of that study was, well, what about interdisciplinary projects? What happens there? Well, in our interdisciplinary project with How to Change the World, that project we talked about where we kind of pull them outside of their comfort zone. What happens here is that students are more open-minded to different perspectives of the problem and approaches to the solutions, so that students work to bring their disciplinary practice and knowledge to the interdisciplinary team. So I'm incredibly, I feel very fortunate to have two interdisciplinary aspects of learning in the IEP. And perhaps we didn't think of it in the beginning, but we know now that these are adding layers of development within their experience with us. So I'm going to take a breath, because that's a real significant moment. Those were significant elements that, as my time, that's my contribution to the research and also to the community. So I was hired in 2013 for curriculum development. First year of the cohort, IEP, was in 2014, so we had a year to create the content and deliver it, work with the staff to get it out. I went on mat leave in 2015, my first little one. I taught 1 year of the IEP before I was off, and that was significant. And there was a major change in the Engineering Challenges module that happened for the better. Now, all of us were a little bit worried about how that happened, but the Challenges module had interdisciplinarity throughout it, in the first project and the second project, and they're both about 5 weeks. The departments decided that they wanted to put the first project to be discipline specific. They decided together, through our community of practice, that actually our UCL students come into their degree. They come into chemical engineering. They choose their discipline. We have to honor that. We have to allow them to explore their discipline, because the fruits and the riches of the research and the experts that we have in each of those departments is beyond what they think mechanical engineering is or computer science. And I have no doubt that that's true in other institutions as it is in UCL. So those first 5 weeks were so imperative not to bring them into that gray space, but into a space to start belonging within their discipline and then move into interdisciplinary space. And during my mat leave, I interviewed for the director role. And that's significant. My baby was little. We have some colleagues here who were here while I was interviewing. And that meant a lot. So in 2016, I returned from mat leave into the director role. And this is also a key moment for me too, because it was another opportunity to bring someone into the lead for the Engineering Challenges module with a background from social science. And I say this all the time in hindsight, that if we're going to teach interdisciplinarity, our staff have to be from different disciplines. And that was one of the best moves that John made, hiring a non-engineer, particularly in the beginning, as well as embracing someone to lead an engineering project that was from the social sciences, but had the passion to work with engineers and designers, because she's our biggest advocate. She is like, engineers can do wonderful things, and I want to work with them and help them actually believe in that. So as the next IEP director, I had a mandate to build. We had to keep going. It was only 2 years. We still had 2 more years to go. There were still, we hadn't had that full graduating class. So the things that I won't go into, but the things that I had to build on were creating a new leadership structure. So we had a management committee where members from each department were kind of managing this change process. But we started talking and using the structure, or the educational structure, governance structure that was happening in departments or in faculties. So we have a teaching committee where directors of studies, or the heads of all the departments that are responsible for education, would oversee the IEP. and they would scrutinize and audit everything that we did, which is keeping us accountable, and that still exists. We have student ambassadors now. In the beginning, we didn't really have that student voice, but we had 2 years of students that had come on board, some of them convinced, others not, but those that were really wanted to help the next year ones come in and make that transition easier. The IEP minors, having students be able to choose a secondary area of study was something that we only just started. There was a lot of administration around that, helping the students get to choose and communicating to them the advantage of that and the possibilities was a lot of work. The faculty leadership versus the departmental autonomy. One of the things that I was acutely aware of was making sure we weren't going backwards, right? I was at the point where we were at 2 years. We wanted to keep going, right? We only had contracts for 2 years. We wanted to keep going. And in my job has always been, what is the balance between the faculty leadership and that autonomy that we know the departments need? Accreditation was happening now. So how do we sell the IEP through systems that don't really recognize this new way of learning? How do we argue that this is the way to do it? We were starting to work with international collaborators, particularly those that had done such great work in America, in the United States of America. The faculty PGTA program, having we have like more than 100 teaching associates in the PhD, as PhD students, and that training program so that they could go into classrooms from all departments was a big job. Giving them awards and recognitions because of the amount of work that they do and the significance they have on the student journey. And then also helping them to become associate fellows of the HEA. That is also something we've been working on. And then more recently, we're still building, so academic writing being something that is so central to what we do. Making sure it's in the classroom and the students don't have to go seek that support. And then our student cohort is becoming more and more diverse every year. That international student support is something we are very conscious of as our cohorts are getting larger and more diverse. But also, as the next IEP director, I was meant to maintain. There is another genius in the system. John kicked it off, and then having someone maintain it was really important because we have different skill sets, and I think that really worked for us. So that graph on the side there, if you go back to John's lecture, he talks about the ripple of thinking we're doing so well and then coming back down and then going again with the learning curve. But these were some of the things that we really had to maintain, our quality, getting the student feedback and working with the student experience. We did things with inclusive curriculum, collaborations, development of the annual cycle so our teaching committee could audit us. The effective administration, and you'll see that that has grown into what we do. And generally, my job is about moderating complexity. This is complex. People that come into it recognize it as incredibly complex, and we do too. But our job is to really moderate that and help people through it. So really, have we established that mastery? Unsure, not sure. Are we a team of boats going on one track? Possibly not. Really unsure. But that's our goal. Where I think we are, or perhaps where we were, was in that red line. And we're getting closer to maintaining. But there's still work to do. I want to say that along the way we've been recognized. This was a highlight for us, 2017, collaborating together and winning the HEA award. Something that UCL's never really won before, and we were very pleased to win it together. We also went internationally and won a Curriculum Innovation Award, but even back then, 2017, people really didn't understand what we were doing. It was too big. You know, no one was ready for the type of work that we were doing. But that was an interesting conversation. And then in 2018 was significant for us with the MIT Global State of the Art report. MIT being a significant institution in our engineering education community. Us being recognized as a future leader was really important for us. And so at that time, it was important that we started documenting our curriculum reform and change. These are two papers that are really close to our heart. You can see the authors. We've worked so hard to write down not just how we delivered it and the philosophies around it, but how we created that reform. And these are often papers we get notified about and people refer to all the time when we go abroad or even outside of the UK. The other thing that I was incredibly proud of is to go to America, where a lot of this has been happening, perhaps before we have, and bring together a more diverse group of academics from across the faculty, contributing to papers on what is our integrated engineering program and what the student experience was. So 2019, I went on maternity leave again. This is a big year. This is the year that I was awarded Principal Fellow of the HEA and my promotion to professorship. That was in 2019. That year too, we won that multi-million-dollar contract to start creating curriculum for a new university in Egypt. And that has been a whole other story. But it's just amazing to know that we can not only make change here, but make change elsewhere. And I think that's what it's for. We can't just do what we need to do here at UCL. This is about engineering. This is about the engineering profession and what we can do for our graduates going forward, not just here locally, but everywhere. And so I returned and COVID happened. 2020, it was a month just before COVID happened. And we switched to online teaching. The challenges and the opportunities were immense. 2021 was COVID hybrid, and that was even more immense, really difficult. But the significance of there was that in that year, our administration team went from one person, it was always one person, to 3. It was the first time where everybody realized that the work that we were doing for thousands of students needed the administration team to support the academic work. And that was significant. We can do more now as academics, teaching focused academics, the research members too. And so 2022, the IEP becomes not a branch of the Dean and the Vice Dean of Education where it was emerged, but as its own, through the Centre of Engineering Education, with the remit to not just do the work within UCL, but to do more. So I became Director of Studies in working with our MSc in Engineering Education, training those, providing the education for those that want to teach in engineering education, or in engineering, the IEP, but also now our foundation year, trying to get students to come through to engineering through a wider, diverse group. So that's that year 0 program. This is the slide I have on COVID. And I know Fiona's looking at me because I told her that, unfortunately, this is the sign that I've got for her experience of COVID. So the engineering challenges, professional skills, and mathematical modeling all went through different experiences, and they're not my stories, so I'm going to skim over it. These are the stories that these academics will tell, hopefully in their inaugural, because they're mega stories. So for Fiona, it was like, God, I just got to get practical-based learning online at large scale. All the academics have to do it with me. How do we go from practical to simulated? But she told me today that it wasn't all danger, like it wasn't all reactory. And sure, they've gone back to face-to-face in total. But there were a lot of learning about the explicit way in which they had to teach the students about working together, particularly. And so Fiona's a lot to say on that, and I hope one day she'll be able to tell it. And then Chika with design and professional skills. Much more of a nice story. We were creating portfolios, videos and resources for all the academics to use together as a community. It was wonderful. We were like, oh, praise for the portfolios we got the students to do, all the asynchronous videos, really supporting the rest of the IEP. And then maths. The shift we made in maths because of COVID is something that I'm incredibly proud of our team. We took an incredibly challenging event and turned it to our advantage. Long gone are the lectures of hundreds of students in lecture theatres falling asleep to mathematics lectures. Long gone. Because we used the technology of videos and being able to put mathematics into the digital space. so that they don't just tick a box for the answer, they can do mathematics digitally into the system, their virtual learning environments. We used these tools and embedded them. But the mega shift was not just teaching maths for maths' sake, but teaching maths in context of engineering problems. I always get raised eyebrows when I say, we teach partial differential equations in the context of small business coffee growing in Brazil. And people are like, what? How's that even possible? The connection between the technical mathematics and that contextual learning is so beyond even those that are most, professed in mathematical education. And the team that was led by Abel and all the work to bring that community together and then advanced by Matt that made those ideas come, and Eva, the work that you've done to make sure it happens in the second year as well, is phenomenal. So this brings me to my team, our team, all the faces, all the people that I've talked about. One of the things is that I am here because of who we are. There were plenty of times when I hired the person that not everybody on the panel thought was best for the job because of the CV and perhaps the experience and perhaps the proclaimed knowledge and the research papers that they had. The person that got the job, and I know I'm speaking for John here too, was the one that was speaking the same language, that had the vision and the passion for what we wanted to do with the students. You all feel that with me, and I am incredibly fortunate to have you. But that's my advice for everyone. You bring in people, no matter of their experience, that think like you and that have the vision and passion. And then it's our jobs as leaders to pave and open that pathway for them to flourish, because that's what happens. So I'm so grateful to you, all of you. Last catch up. 2023 is a big year. I was elected to CEFI, that European Society for Engineering Education. It's not just me, though. I am pushed into the senior role because colleagues across the Centre for Engineering Education have a presence in Europe now. We recognize the importance of having that connection to people of like-mindedness in Europe as well. And so that includes chairs of special interest groups on EDI, and I know there are others, curriculum development and capacity building and long life learning, but also through the journal and as well as the board of directors. It's just an upgrade. So I never got my PhD. This is something that I've never really actually said vocally very often. I would shyly put on the master's cap in the graduation ceremony, and that's how most people would know that I didn't get my PhD. I left. I took the job. I came to the UK, and I'm incredibly grateful that I did that. But now I know that my PhD is going to be on education, and my topic is about how do we use design, how do we lean into design, that open door for us in engineering to embed social responsibility into our curriculum. I want to look at designers, architects and fashion designers to help us in our next stages. And then it's a significant year. It's our 10 years, as we said. There's lots going on, lots to celebrate. We'll be having a party in April for all the staff again. We are going to bring academics internationally to UCL to define what integrated engineering is, because we're not the only ones. And there will be more inaugurals to come. So, my future vision. Integrated engineering is the future. Integration within engineering is the future. And whether that's in the verse of skills embedding, whether we bring values and attributes in, whether we give students choice, whether it's that active learning, whether we bring the community in, there are all different types of approaches. But we deliberately have to, for our sake, kind of consider a different engineering for our graduates that need to adapt to our changing world. And so I recognize the key partners from all over the world that are helping us do that. And I'm so grateful that we are there, and I'm bringing many of my colleagues with me. So that's the topic of my talk, and I know I'm kind of really there now, stretching your time before we get the drinks, but I have to put this in. I'm going to lead with culture. Tim Brown is someone that I quote very often. EDIO is something I quote often. It's a design institution in America. And he has quite a lot of Harvard Business School blogs and reports and that sort of thing. Very easy to understand. And he says, I captured this on LinkedIn 6 years ago, for organizations seeking to become more adaptive and innovative, cultural change is often the most challenging part of the transformation. The importance is of movements, not mandates. And I full-heartedly believe in that. To lead cultural change in organizations, it's about movements, not mandates. It's about us and what we've done and what we continue to do. Last story, absolute last. The other day I went into the Houseman, which is our senior academic room, for lunch. And I will say that it wasn't all, bells and whistles when it comes to academics and the vision that I had for the IEP. And I bump into, and I often bump into, a colleague who has challenged me on a number of times. And we have a nice rapport now. He's an emeritus professor, but he sticks around UCL, and it's really lovely to see him. And so on this one occasion, which I hadn't seen him since before COVID, he said to me, "Oh, Tilley, what are you doing these days?" I said, "I'm doing the IEP." "Oh, is that still going?" "Oh, I thought we kind of dug that grave long time ago." I said, "No, I'm still here." But the really wonderful thing was, so tell John Mitchell, through the Centre for Engineering Education, I think he won the bid to start collaborating with the South African group on integrated engineering and building and doing more embedding of skills. So I tried to put in a bid. I've got colleagues from Africa. Can I put my colleagues in touch with his colleagues, please? And it goes full circle, right? So culture is something that happens because of what we do, not because of anyone mandating to do it. That's my talk, and thank you so much for sticking around. I went so long you can't do questions.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much. I'd like to invite Professor Parama Chowdhury to give a vote of thanks. Parama is the Pro Vice Provost Education Student and Academic Experience. Oh, I've been practicing that.
Thanks a lot, John. So I don't think there's a huge amount to say after that. That was amazingly inspiring. And like Emanuela said, the drinks are just as important as everything else, so won't keep you from that. Keep this nice and short. 3 things I wanted to touch on, really. Like John, I'm also really proud of the Academic Careers Framework, which facilitates and recognizes education, which, surprising that it doesn't come up so often, is one of the 2 big things that we do as a university. So it's good that it's in there and recognized. And I agree with John as well that Emanuela really embodies what that was meant to be. So excellence in education through sort of and with scholarship of teaching and learning. So I think I don't need to sort of explain to you everything she has said today kind of maps onto that. So if you're doing this exercise, UCL people, if you're looking at the ACF, map that onto this talk, you're good to go there. Second thing I was going to say is when we took part in the Teaching Excellence Framework, the TEF exercise, this past year, one of the things we had to do is to work with students to figure out what they meant by educational gain that they got out of the university. This is one of the things that the Office for Students asked us. It's essentially what you're giving students. What they said to us, and we have close to 50,000 students, about half of whom were covered by the TEF, what they said to us with one voice essentially was, we want to make an impact. And I think it was really interesting, Emanuela, that you started with the cutlery for the arthritis and for the rowing team. That's impact. But then from that experience, you've developed something, the IEP, the new module as well, that is equipping the students to have the skills that they can have impact. You know, the short run, it might be about grades, it might be about the job and so on, but impact is something that came back to us, and I think this talk really embodied how you can do that. Second thing I was going to say on this is, in order to do that, in order to help the students have impact, you need to have impact. And the way to do that is with the hearts, minds, systems, and culture. And I love that movements, not mandates as well. I think we've all sort of figured out structures. The bosses can tell you whatever they want. It's not going to happen until you have all those people along with you making that change. And I know engineering is our biggest faculty. Lots of people involved, cross-departmental work. It's tough, let me tell you. Haven't tried it? Well, be inspired by Emanuela, but I wouldn't recommend going, it's difficult, let's say it that way. So congratulations on getting all of that together as well. And it's obviously important to recognize all of the pieces. So as she did at the beginning, education-focused, research-focused academic colleagues as well. Professional services staff doesn't happen without them. PGTAs, who are also our PhD students, so they're the next generation. That's a way to get the movement started, moving as well. External partners, super important, not just for the engineers. I'm in economics, a professor in the economics department for us as well. Despite what people tell you, not everyone becomes a banker, so there's other external partners as well. And of course our lovely students who help us, support us along the way, and it's their sort of push that was central in everything that Emanuela said, and that's what gets us sort of going every morning. Final thing I'll just say is that it's great to have so many education-focused professors now, and amazingly, I'm also in a profession where there aren't a lot of, in a field where there aren't a lot of female professors. So again, that's a huge, huge thing. I can see other female professors there as well. So huge congratulations. Thank you for this amazing talk, and thanks for being an inspiration. Thank you.
Oh gosh. Oh wow. Thank you very much. Wow. Oh, bigger than you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.